and me. And so that's just a really wonderful opportunity for those who know Brian Gray. You know the quality of the research that he brings as a representative of Rudolf Steiner and representative of anthroposophy. And so Brian will be bringing, in many ways, the conceptual frameworks with just his deep love and compassion in which he brings this from the basic books. And then my role will be more of participating in the discussion and the dialogue and the application. So we're just very excited. We're probably going to begin with How to Know Higher Worlds. And so I know that there are other groups that are working on that right now, but which is wonderful. And so we thought about perhaps starting with, we might potentially start with a different book, but there's lots of reasons, since we're planning on a series, even if it begins on the heels of another group finishing their series, it's okay, because not everybody is able to participate in everybody's groups. So anyway, the basic book series, and we plan then over the course of about 2.5 years, probably do 2 books a year and really dive deep and really focus not just on the concepts, but the practicality, the practical applications.
Yeah, thank you so much. Dear friends, again, thank you for joining. How Ahriman Thwarts Perception of Christ, presentation by Lelan Harris. Dear Lelan, over to you.
Okay, I just saw a request for my email address, so I will type that into the chat real quickly for anybody else who might want that as well. It's simply lelan@wisecosmos.org, and my name does not have a D on the end. For those who know the typical English spelling, it's just Lelan without a D. Well, thank you so much, Andre and Chicago branch, and so many of you who are part of the branch who have invited me to come back to speak a second time in this setting. And it's an honor and just really a gift to me to be able to have this opportunity to be here. It's interesting, I won't tell the whole story, but I had an original idea for what I wanted to thought might do with this evening. And in the process of talking with Andre, and he has a better feel for the pulse of the group and things like that, he suggested that I maybe consider something else. And then that just was really, actually in the end, was very exciting for me, because I realized, as I thought about what he said about this group, I realized that this topic that I'm bringing is perhaps really timely and on point. And so I'm looking forward to the ideas that I had originally had. I put, I already have about 4.5 hours of material on that. So it was like, you know what, it was too big for this setting. And so I'll do that as a series in the future in a different context. But as we come to this topic, I had said a little earlier, you might have, if you were here early, you heard me say that it is really my desire for this presentation to have content to be provided to you and for us to immerse ourselves in, and then to really move into an active discussion period. I have decided not to focus very heavily on application in my initial presentation, so that the application can come from you. You ask your questions, and together we'll respond and share what we have learned and what we know. And in that way, it'll really be tailored to you who are able to be present, those of you who have committed to be present, and rather than me guessing what kind of practical applications you might like. So with that as, I think, enough before I go to the slides, I'm going to go to screen share and work our way through some wonderful material that I hope will be inspiring and frankly transformative for you. All right. So, how Ahriman Thwarts perception of Christ. The description that I gave for this, as you've probably already read, but let me go over it again. Intellectual activity, says Rudolf Steiner, is spiritual activity, but the intellect cannot directly absorb that which is spiritual. This exposes our intellect to the great danger of falling prey to Ahrimanic powers through the most innocuous and truly unexpected of sources. And that's a hint at the big reveal that I'm going to offer. Now, some of you may already know about this, but from my conversations, it sounds like not many people know this. So this really is going to be an esoteric presentation in the sense that the information that Rudolf Steiner shares with us is occulted. It is right there in front of us, but we can't see it. We tend not to see it for various reasons. And this is just such a huge piece of information with regard to how Ahriman is at work in our lives, that it seemed and I haven't heard anybody else talk about it. Doesn't mean nobody else is, I just haven't heard anybody else talk about it. And so I thought this would be a place to bring it up. Lack of awareness of just exactly how these adversarial powers hold our intellects in their grip explains why people struggle to perceive Christ. And that's the kicker here. Is I know so many people who are striving to develop their capacity to be able to perceive Christ and feel thwarted, feel stuck, and feel unable. And this is worrisome for some people. And so this, what I'm going to share, what Rudolf Steiner is going to share, is going to be a significant piece of the puzzle for many people. And then I say, once understood, freedom and access to Christ becomes straightforward. Now, I'm not so silly as to believe that what I'm going to share here is going to make it simple, but it is going to clear a path that you may not have had before. And I really mean it, that based on my personal experience, that once we begin to grasp and be able to work with this concept, bring it down into practicality, we really do become freed from these adversarial powers in a whole new way. And that opens up the door to a straightforward gate or portal to move towards Christ. All right. Now, I got to thinking about how I wanted to be present with you tonight in sharing this. And I was really clear with myself that I didn't want to really come as the teacher. Rudolf Steiner will be our teacher, and I'm simply conveying the information. And as I was thinking about it, I thought about this beautiful card from Denise Lin in a set called The Sacred Traveler. And I thought, oh, this is perfect. And I wanted to just share it with you. So there's a lot in this picture, in this image, but in particular, I'm just going to focus briefly on, we have three human characters. And we have the person on the right, who appears to be a merchant type of character, who is trying to get somewhere and is not really sure how to get where he is going. And in the middle, we have a local. And the local, excuse me, the local knows the terrain and the merchant on the right, the person who is seeking to get to a destination, is willing to ask questions, is willing to ask for directions. How good is that? And the local is willing to share from what appears to be lifelong experience in the area on all possible routes. Well, you could go this way and you can go this way, and there's this path over here. And by the way, if you go there, there's this, and you might keep an eye out for that. And so a wealth of information. And then we have this character on the left, who also has, and the person in the middle, our local, has sort of arrived at his destination. He lives there. He's where he wants to be, needs to be, we would hope and trust. And then the person on the left with the smile and heading off frame here is also a person with a destination in mind. And it's not completely clear whether this person is a relative local or someone who is on a much longer journey. I kind of tend to think in some ways that this is more of somebody on a longer journey. And this person maybe has a greater sense of clarity on where he's going. But if he is, for me, one of the things that comes up in this character is that he's a person who knows where he's going, but may not necessarily know how he's going to get there completely, doesn't know the whole route, but is just so happy and elated to be on the journey and in motion, and is just ready to take things as they come. And in that way, and all three of them then in this particular card, it says at the bottom, it talks about each of us standing in the light of our truth. And so it was interesting that this image came to my mind when I was considering how I wanted to be present with you. And I realized then when it came to mind, I was just pondering it, and I got to thinking, oh, you know what? In a way, I feel like I can be all three people in a way. That's how I feel. I feel like I'm the fellow on the right who has an idea of where I want to go, but I'm not sure how to get there in every aspect of my spiritual life. And there's another way in which includes some of the content I'm bringing. I don't know everything about more the most expansive way of the content I'm bringing. But I know a lot. And so in that way, I'm like the local. It's not that this is brand new to me. It's not that I'm just bringing you concepts. I'm going to be able to share from you out of my experience as a local, working with these concepts and integrating them in my life over a long period of time. And then I also feel like this other fellow on the left who is just so happy to be on the road and knowing that I'm going to come across other fellow travelers like you who are paying attention and heading in similar directions as I am. And I look forward to coming across fellow travelers to walk with you as long as our journey keeps us on the same trail or same road, knowing that you'll be splitting off or I'll be splitting off to take other paths along the way. But it's just a delight to be with you. So anyway, that just gives you some images of where I'm coming from relative to this material. Now, before starting with Rudolf Steiner, I actually want to start with a story from the Old Testament in the Bible, in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 19. And this is actually going to be a little bit of it's going to start giving you clues. This story will start giving you clues as to what Rudolf Steiner reveals to us when he pulls back the curtain on what's going on with Ahriman in our lives and how Ahriman blocks our perception of Christ. So great story. And at the time that this is happening, Elijah was like the number one prophet in Israel, and King Ahab and Queen Jezebel were king and queen of Israel, and they were bad. They were under Ahriman's sway, not Lucifer's, Ahriman's. And so King Ahab told Queen Jezebel everything Elijah had done, which was they perceived as a threat, because Elijah was the living human countenance representative of Yahweh. And so Elijah had really been coming in the power of Yahweh and really being disruptive to the king and queen. So the king told the queen what Elijah had done, and and then how King Ahab had, as a consequence, set out to kill all the prophets with the sword, and basically killed everybody except Elijah. Elijah gets away. He's the only one. All the prophets, all the people who represent the living God, the living Lord, to Israel, they're all dead except Elijah. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make you suffer and die like all the other prophets of Yahweh. My husband failed to kill you. I won't. You've got 24 hours to live. Well, Elijah, though he had just pulled off with Yahweh some huge miracles, and was afraid, and he ran for his life. And when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there for his own safety in some ways, and while he himself went on a day's journey out into the wilderness. And he came to a broom bush, which is significant, and sat down under it and prayed to his God that he might be allowed to die like all the other prophets. I have had enough, Lord, he said. I can't keep this up. Take my life, please. I am no better than my ancestors. Elijah had a bit of a problem with pride, and through these experiences had come into a much greater perception of who he was and who God was, who the Lord was. And out of that had been able to be much more used by the Lord, and much more effective and much more powerful. And at the same time, though, he had this, but this time he didn't have this Luciferic boost to his ego. Rather, it was really counterbalanced by this sense of grief for who he had been. And so then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep, hoping that God would answer this prayer, just like God had answered other prayers, and that this time he would lay down to go to sleep and he wouldn't wake up. And then all at once, an angel touched him and told him to get up and eat. And Elijah looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So Elijah got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. So he was fasting for 40 days and 40 nights while traveling in rough country, and until he could get to the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. Then the word of the Lord, Yahweh, came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? And he replied, I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty, for you. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They've torn down your altars. They've put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. So a little bit of a pity party here, but everything he said is true. He'd survived 41, 42 days at least past Jezebel's promise to kill him, but he just felt the weight of this sword hanging over his head, and he just didn't feel able to move on. The Lord said, go out of the cave and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord, me, I'm about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind was tearing the mountains apart. I love that in the original language here, this is the Hebrew. It doesn't say, it's not past tense. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart, but the author here is seeking to get us to enter into it, that this is really happening. So Elijah is able to perceive God, is able to hear God. And so he hears God say, get up and go stand at the entrance of a cave. And when he gets out there, this great and powerful wind just is tearing the mountains apart. It's a wind so great that it's shattering the rocks into pieces in the presence of the Lord. The presence, the presence of the Lord is there, having this visceral, material manifestation. But the Lord, it says, was not in the wind. After the wind, there came an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a sound of a gentle whisper. So all those other things, the Lord was coming, but not there. And then came a sound of a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard the whisper, he knew that the Lord had actually arrived. And he pulled his cloak over his face because he knew he could hear the Lord and not die, but he was absolutely certain that he could not see the Lord without dying, at least with his physical eyes. So he pulled his cloak over his face to hide his eyes and went out to stand in the mouth of the cave. So he'd been told to go out and stand on the mountain, but now we understand that probably somewhere in the midst of the wind and the earthquake and the fire, he'd sort of backed up into the safety of the cave. We can understand that. But now with the gentle whisper, hearing the whisper, he pulls the cloak over his face and steps out to where the Lord told him to go. Then a voice came to him saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Which, remember, was the original question when he was deeper in the cave. So I'd like you to notice that we have some of these elements of nature, of the mountain, wind, rocks, earthquake, fire. And notice that we also have this sound of a gentle whisper. We have Elijah hearing the whisper, and we hear a voice. He hears a voice that came to him. Isn't that interesting? The voice came to him, and it said, it communicated. Okay, I'm going to stop the story there. And with some of these imaginations as our foundation, let us move on to Rudolf Steiner. So this is from a lecture in 1922, titled Anthroposophy, a striving for spiritual understanding of nature permeated by Christ and connected to the end of Kali Yuga, the Dark Age. So humanity unfolded its intellectual life in the course of many centuries. This intellectual life gradually led it away from spirituality. Now, Steiner has spent lots of time over the past couple of decades nearly talking about this, and he's not at this time going to explain that. He's just referring to it for us to know the context and his starting place. The intellect itself is spirit, but its content is no longer a spiritual content. So we have an intellect that is spirit, and in the past, our intellect was able to encompass spiritual content, but is not anymore. Indeed, the intellect is spiritual, but it seeks as its content external nature, the external life of nature. Now, notice that he says both that the intellect is itself spirit and something else different, the intellect is spiritual. But it seeks as its content external nature, the external life of nature, the material realm, Hence, the intellect is spirit, but it fills itself with something which cannot appear to it as spiritual. So this is where we have, in even those of us who are engaged in esoteric development, when rubber meets the road, practicalities, we spend most of our time, to the degree that we are consciously focusing on our body, soul, and spirit development, we are engaged largely in exoteric practices. And one could say that that there are these, one of the things Rudolf Steiner talks about is he talks about three different types of, one of his models is three different levels of development. He talks about the level of body, the level of soul, and the level of spirit. And at the level of body is really the exoteric practices. At the level of soul, he calls those mystical. And at the level of spirit, those are truly spiritual. And we tend to be confused and just say spiritual growth or spiritual development. And we just to encompass all three of those things. And that's fine at earlier stages in our development, but it becomes a hindrance later on. And it becomes important to be able to distinguish when are we engaged with exoteric body level practices, when are we at the soul level, the mystical practices, and when are we truly working on the spiritual, at the spirit level of our being. And Rudolf Steiner, in How to Know Higher Worlds and Guidance in Esoteric Training and everything that he brings is bringing things at all three levels, because we need all three levels. In fact, if we are not engaged at all three levels, that's one of the reasons we get stuck. If we're trying to do this spiritual development stuff and we're not getting anywhere, there's a really good chance that one of the reasons is because we're not paying attention to the soul level and the body level that must be taking place at the same time with the spirit. Anyway, this is what he's again, he's talked about all this elsewhere, and he's just referring to it here. And he's pointing out that the intellect is not operating at this, the intellect is spirit and is spiritual, but it's not operating at the spiritual level. It's operating, our intellects at this stage in our development, our intellects are operating at this exoteric level. All right, the great tragedy, the modern tragedy of the world, he says, is that human beings may look into themselves. We can look into ourselves. We're now capable, as modern human beings, we're capable of looking into ourselves. Good news, but he calls that tragedy. He says, because when we do, and we look at ourselves accurately, like Elijah, sorry, I've got a couple of dogs here who are playing. I hope they'll calm down for us. And he says, when we look into ourselves, we must say to ourselves, when I am intellectually active, I am spiritually active, good news, but at the same time, my intellect, which is pure spirit, cannot absorb in a direct way the spiritual, bad news. Therefore, I fill this is what I've been doing. I get an accurate perception when I look into myself and pay attention to these things. I come to the awareness, to the discovery, the tragedy of my life is that I've been filling the spirit in me only with things pertaining to the exoteric, to the outer world, to nature, and things connected with nature. This, he says, is what devastates and rends, tears, rips, shreds the human soul today. Does anybody have the experience of your soul feeling shredded, of not being whole, healthy, holy, at least in part? This is what devastates and rends the human soul today. Even though we do not wish to admit this torn and devastated condition, it nevertheless exists in the spiritual regions of the human soul. And this constitutes the fundamental evil and the fundamental tragedy of our age. Now remember, this is 1922, spoken just a couple of years before he crosses the threshold, speaking to people who know all this past 15, 20, 25 years of content that he has brought. And to these people who know that have been with him, many of them through these periods, and are committed to spiritual growth and development, to manifesting the human evolution. He looks at them, and I would offer that he looks at us, and he says, even though we don't wish to admit our own torn and devastated condition, it nevertheless exists in the spiritual regions of human souls, including ours, this devastated, rended characteristics within our soul. We have made progress, but we still have something going on. And that which is within you, that is unhealed, that is unredeemed, that is unhealthy, constitutes the fundamental evil of our age and is the fundamental tragedy of our age, because we've been blind to it, because we haven't admitted it, or not enough to yet be able to find out what the problem is, even though we've been trying so hard, and yet we keep hitting the walls. So what do we do about it? You know the paths you've been on. I know the paths I've been on. And if you're anything like me, if you're anything like the type of person Rudolf Steiner is speaking to, then you know that something's still missing. And Rudolf Steiner is, in a minute here or so, is going to give us a big clue. He's going to pull back the curtain. So he says, if we wish to express in habitual terms, now by habitual terms, he means anthroposophical habits. So if we wish to express in the typical anthroposophical terms, terminology and jargon that we use around here with each other, what I have explained to you just now, we must draw attention, okay? Must draw attention, focus now, he says. We must draw attention to all the spiritual powers that are still active in the whole life of nature. They enter into us because we fill our own spirit with the life of nature. So you can pause and ... By the way, this sentence isn't over. I'm going to give you literally what his next words are, but I'm pausing here with the ... We got to get this. We fill our spirit with the life of nature. So look around you, like look up, look around. What do you see around you? What are you sitting on? What are you feeling? What are you wearing? What's the temperature like? What's it look like outside the windows? Do you have any dogs growling in the background like mine? All of this is nature. We fill our lives. How much time is spent washing the dishes, cooking, making food, making money, going and picking up the kids, going and playing with the kids, going and taking care of the neighbors, taking care of the old folks, all of this, we permeate most of our day, most of our life. Our spirit life is filled with nature. He just wants us to just get that really clear. And then he goes on to say, they enter into us, the spiritual powers still active in the whole of nature, enter into us because we fill our own spirit with the life of nature, and we may designate these powers as the Ahrimanic powers. me just give one example to contextualize this. How many of us go out into nature in order to get regrounded? Well, who is it? What spiritual being and legions of beings are associated with grounding? Ahriman. How many of us go out into nature to find Christ, but maybe have experiences that are spiritual, but we don't actually see or hear Christ in nature? Because at this level, at this point, we're not saying Christ isn't around, right? But let's just stay with this point, because Christ is not to be found in nature. Ahriman is there. Now, this is not a bad thing. This is a good thing. But if you've struggled and thought that you could find access to Christ in nature, through nature, Rudolf Steiner is telling us here that that's not where Christ is found. Okay? All right. Now, it goes beyond that, but that's one example. All right, let's see what else he says. If we wish to express in habitual terms what I have explained to you just now, I'm repeating this on purpose. We must draw attention to all the spiritual powers that are still active in the whole life of nature. They enter into us because we fill our own spirit with the life of nature, and we may designate these powers as the Ahrimanic powers. Now, Lucifer is also there, and as I sort of hinted, Christ is also there, but in a very different way. And so we just have to get really clear that just as Rudolf Steiner talks about that when human beings have, generally most of us, when we have our first true God experience, our first true spirit experience, we name that, and we have a conceptual framework from religion or spirituality for that spiritual or religious experience encounter that we have. We then name, we name as the being what we've been taught to expect. So if we've been taught Allah, and then we have a spiritual experience, we believe it's Allah because we've been set up to believe it's Allah. And if it's Yahweh, then Yahweh. And if it's Christ, it's Christ. If it's just sort of God, it's God. If it's Sophia, it's Sophia. If it's Gaia, it's Gaia. And what Rudolf Steiner says is, pulling back the curtain, vast majority, call it basically everybody, that first encounter you have is not with the being you name it. It's actually your guardian angel, who is so far above you, even though only one stage of development above you, that definitely seems like the highest possible being, the father, the mother, and Steiner says that's not true. But we name it that, believing that's what it is. And that's what happens with nature too, that when we come into nature and experience the gifts that come from nature in all the different ways, both at the sort of physical material level and at the soul and spiritual level, and we name it the being that we think, we understand stands behind nature or created nature or whatever. And so we jump to that being, and Rudolf Steiner is pulling back the curtain and saying, actually it's not, it's actually Ahriman. So our intellect is thus exposed to the great danger of falling prey to the Ahrimanic powers because of how much we immerse ourselves in nature and how much we permeate our spirit with nature in all the different ways, from trees to highways, all right? From making paper airplanes with our kids to flying in airplanes to a different continent. During the past centuries, when the intellect was still unfolding and still possessed the inheritance of an old spiritual life, these Ahrimanic powers did not have that great an influence on human beings, such as they have now. The life of nature appears to us to be spread out all around us, but that is only apparent. That's part of the veil. That's the Maya. For Ahriman lives in nature. So when we go to nature for comfort, whether it's your comfort food or your comfort chair or your comfort television program or your comfort outdoor activity, your garden, your swimming in the pond. When we do this, we are absorbing nature. And when we believe that it's only controlled by neutral laws of nature, if we're materialistic, or by good, our highest and best beings, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Divine Sophia, Gaia, Mother, whatever, we're actually not absorbing those beings into our spirits. And we're not even aware of it because we've misnamed it. We've mislabeled it. We've mistaken it. We have taken in a kind of a kind of error, these Ahrimanic spiritual powers. However, that is not the end of the story, because this is good. So it's a tragedy. It's devastating. It destroys our souls. It's the evil of the age in us. And so, yes, he's setting up that there's a problem, but he's also, Steiner's going to come back and say, okay, now that we sort of set up that end of the pendulum, we're going to get to the other side of the story. It's never that simple. Ahriman so these Ahrimanic spiritual powers are they who took over a special task in cosmic life, in the whole evolution of the world. Somebody needed to do something for humanity, and Ahriman said, me and my legions will do it. When we speak of the task of these spiritual powers, some people are easily inclined to say, but why does the divine guidance of the world, the highest spiritual progressive beings who are all for humanity, why does the divine guidance of the world admit these powers, allow these Ahrimanic powers in to our lives, hidden Trojan horses, somebody said earlier before we started tonight? To this, we must reply. All that exists in the earthly sphere may be grasped with the ordinary understanding. But when it is a question of grasping in a spiritual scientific way, that which is really going on, that which transcends the earth, that which stands behind the earth, then we can't do it with our ordinary exoteric understanding at the body level. We can't do it with our still pretty common mystical soul level perception. We must instead go all the way up to spiritual vision and at the realm of intuition. Consequently, we must say these powers exist, but the way in which they are connected with the divine spiritual powers pertaining to human beings can only be grasped in the course of long epochs. The only reason we can see it now is because we have clairvoyants like Rudolf Steiner who are capable of putting it all in context. Indeed, and also be as you know, so there's one, it's one thing to perceive, whoa, yikes, wait a minute, what? It's Ahriman. Or, first he said, first we perceive that there's something in our soul that's devastated and evil. And then if we can, so that's at one level. Then at the next level, we might be able to perceive Ahriman. And then comes the question, whoa, what's up with that? How did that happen? And then you have to go up to a higher level yet to be able to see that these powers exist, but the way in which they are connected with the divine spiritual powers. So we've got sort of a good guy, bad guy thing. So the way they're connected pertaining to human beings can only be grasped in the course of long epochs. Indeed, the powers belonging to the superhuman sphere are often quite inaccessible to the human understanding, most of us. We can therefore only say, so somebody like Rudolf Steiner can only say to those of us who have not yet developed the capacity to perceive this stuff directly over long, not only in ourselves, but over past long epochs of time. If we haven't developed that level of spiritual perception, somebody who has can only say, look, these powers exist. They do show themselves to those who have spiritual knowledge. But we also know that Rudolf Steiner repeatedly tells us, look, I'm not asking you to believe anything that I say. I'm telling you this, but you need to develop the capacity to go out and test it and prove it for yourself. And that's through spiritual science and on other developments. And this is one of those things. This is why we need spiritual science. And so it is possible for us, and I'll stand as testimony to that, it is possible, given Rudolf Steiner telling us this, we can begin to devise the kind of experiments and testing to be able to find out whether this is true or not. And if we've lived long enough, and if we are self-aware enough, we may actually already, right at this point, you may already be able to do this, to stop and think about your past life. And you might already have light bulbs going on and saying, because you've had experiences, whether it's in your home, or it's in the forest, or it's on a mountain, or it's wherever, where suddenly this idea that it is Ahriman who permeates all of nature that we ingest physically, at the body level, the soul level, and the spirit level, that Ahriman, to the degree it's connected to nature, the books we read, everything we do, that it's all connected with Ahriman, and we're ingesting Ahriman every step of the way, even when we think we're not, because we've been attributing it to another being. And suddenly we may begin to understand why that which was also a gift and food and healing at one level, nevertheless did not fully satisfy, nevertheless did not fully accomplish what we expected it to accomplish. Kind of a big deal to have this discovery. The tasks of the Harmonic beings is the following: to prevent the earth from continuing to develop as it should develop in accordance with the intentions of the progressive divine spiritual powers with whom human beings have been connected from the very outset, inasmuch as the individual is a human soul. So they have this sort of thwarting capacity, but there's a reason. You will find all these things mentioned in my book, Occult Science and Outline. In that book, I've spoken of the future development of the Earth, the Jupiter and Venus phases of evolution, and the aim of the Harmonic powers is to prevent this course of development. Their aim is to harden and freeze up the Earth, to shape it in such a way that, together with the Earth, humanity and the Earth remains earthbound. We unite with the earth, and together with the earth, we are an earthbound creature. A humanity that becomes hardened, as it were, within earthly substance and continues to live in the future ages of the world. Reincarnation will keep happening. In the future ages of the world, we'll come back as a kind of statue of our past. We'll just basically keep recapitulating our past. We'll just become better and better statues of the best moments and the worst moments of our past. These powers thus pursue very definite aims, which helps us be able to recognize them. By the way, when you're setting up your spiritual scientific tests, clue, these powers thus pursue definite aims, which undoubtedly appear as part of their own individual striving. In other words, they've been given this mandate by the good spirits and are going after it wholeheartedly. They're not slackers. The earth could not reach its goal. That's us, by the way. So the earth and us and earth could not reach its goal if the Harmonic powers were to gain the victory, if human beings were alienated from their beginnings, from the powers who supported humanity from the beginning of their evolution. outwardly the human being would develop in a way entirely in keeping with the earthly sphere. Good news. Know anybody else? Know anybody, any spiritualities that are out there who are, trying to unite with the earth and be one with the earth and, get back to our roots and get back to, caveman diet and, all this kind of stuff. So we, it's people are trying to have that sort of unity with the earth, and they perceive it as redemptive. And it might be, if you're actually being connected to the original progressive spirits, that's what Rudolf Steiner is saying at the beginning of our evolution, those original beginnings. If we're working with those beings, there's one way in which that there's ways in which that manifests, but there's these other ways, which are the more common ways that it manifests. It's actually Ahrimanic. It doesn't feel Ahrimanic because Ahriman makes us feel good and we think it's Christ or Gaia or whoever, but it's not, Steiner is saying. And so outwardly, the human being would develop in a way entirely in keeping with the earthly sphere. That's why it feels good, but only by suppressing humanity's innate disposition, which must lead us beyond the earth. Now, that's a hint that's where then, if we begin to become aware, whether consciously or unconsciously, about the Ahrimanic deception here, then we switch over to the other side and we go, oh, what we got to do is we got to get beyond the earth. And now Lucifer welcomes us with open arms and said, yep, I'm glad you figured it out. Yep, that's bad over there, but come join me. Yes, I'll get you out of the mire. I'll get you off the earth. I'll get you untrapped. I'll help you. And so anyway, that's the setup. So we got to be wary of that too. The Ahrimanic powers could not touch human beings while the intellect was still rooted in the spiritual through an old inheritance, as was the case during the past 3 or 4 centuries. But this has changed since the beginning of the 20th century. The ancient Indian wisdom knew this and fixed the end of the 19th century at the end of the dark age of Kali Yuga. Thus, it had an intimation of a new age, that ancient wisdom. This new age was to indicate that from the beginning of the 20th century, our deepest concern should no longer be that of clinging to an old spiritual inheritance, but absorbing the new light, the pure light, in an earthly life. So we have to be an incarnation in order to absorb the new light, the pure light that moves humanity forward in our development and our evolution. So we have to be incarnated to do it, but we have to be receiving this new thing that's coming from the future, not this return to the past. And so it's not that everything from the past is wrong or bad, but as a general sort of principle, we have to be aware that within us, when we find this longing to go back to a simpler life, Steiner's actually, if we have time, I'll actually show you, Steiner actually says this, where you can find it yourself if I don't get to it tonight. But so this longing for what had been in the past, the simpler life, the pastoral life, the, whatever, this is Ahrimanic deception. All right. Whew. So I'm going to stop for a moment. We've got about 20 minutes before the official time of stopping. And I do have some more material that I would like to offer that's going to help us. But let me pause and let you digest for a moment. And if you want to say anything or ask anything, feel free to jump in now. Is anybody having an OMG moment? Oh, Leon, I see your hand is raised.
Hi, Lelan. I don't want to go into the content at the moment, but I wanted to point out that Vienna isn't in Switzerland.
Oh, oh my goodness. Yes, thank you very much. I was clearly going too fast. Austria, thank you. Thank you. It's in Austria.
Sorry to be picky, but you know.
No, actually, that is meaningful to me.
Yeah.
Being accurate and being precise is really important. And so it's important. Whenever I receive something like that, it takes me back to the moment, and I can look at myself and I can see where I was in body, soul, and spirit that led to that. And then that becomes an opportunity for me to recognize it one more time, to recognize it when it happens again, and to change so that I don't continue in error when I'm in that place. So thank you.
I'd like to share something personal. I grew up in a house of books. My father collected books. They were cheap after the war in England. And they enabled me to get to Oxford and follow an academic career. So I realized I'd become a scholar. I'm pretty good at it. And this year, I left all my books and other possessions behind, and I moved to Chicago by plane with nothing being forwarded. I realized that in my own life, this was happening. And I, could research all this stuff in the literature easily and competently, but that wasn't it.
That's a great story operating on more than one level. Good
Okay.
story. That's great. And I hadn't realized you'd moved, Leon, so now I know. All right, thank you for sharing all that. Valdemar.
Yes. You have read some passages by Steiner, and he was referring to nature. And it's not so difficult to understand that Ahriman is there everywhere in nature, because nature is made of matter, right? But how about technology? Do you have something to say about technology? When we are immersed in technology, is there some difference in comparison to nature? I have my own answer, but I would like to know yours.
For myself, my starting place answer is that there's no difference. And I can tell a story about how this was pointed out to me by the spiritual world. I had a few years ago, I was driving. I was not in my home, and I was driving out. And I guess I can leave out those details. I was driving down a highway surrounded, and there was no other civilization on either side. It was all forest, national forest on either side of me. And it was a Sunday morning, and the sun was streaming down, and this highway was curving through the hills. And it was early Sunday morning, as I said. I was like the only car out there. I had this whole forest to myself, zooming along at this speed, which feels like flying. And I was by myself, and I was heading for a Christian community church that I never visited, but one of the priests was somebody who's very near and dear to me. So I was looking forward to this. This was just this beautiful moment. And I was reveling in nature, in the forest around me, and the light streaming. And so I was in communication and relationship with the nature beings and with nature. And in the midst of this, so a little bit Luciferic in the way I was being present, but also finding that balance because I was connecting down with nature. So I was grounded and connected both ways. And I was just flying in that middle space, it felt to me. And there, just like Elijah, there was this voice, so to speak, that spoke, but it was louder than a whisper. And this voice said, "You're prejudiced." And I was so taken aback, and I had no idea. And I started thinking about, what recent experiences or whatever that I'd had where I'd acted in a way that was wrong, wrongly treated other human beings, and I couldn't think of anything. And so when I couldn't, then I've learned that when you receive a communication from the spirit, it's really good to ask questions. You receive it, you process it, you engage it, and then ask if there's more, and ask if you've got another question. So I asked, and I said, I'm troubled deeply in my soul that that's true, and I'm all the more troubled that I can't see it, that I don't recognize it, that I don't know what you're pointing to. Can you tell me more? How am I prejudiced? And the answer came back is, you're only looking at the forest. You're not grateful at the same level of intensity of body, soul, and spirit for the car, for the highway. Now, I was appreciative, but I was ignoring the beings of the car, of the highway, of the signs, of all the technology that went into making it possible for me to be using technology to traverse through this. I ended up having 2 more incidents after that one where I received the same message, where I fell into the trap again of making a distinction between what I called nature, which was more or less untouched by human hands, and technology, things where human beings had manipulated natural materials to create something else. And I had this very negative reaction, fundamentally in my soul, a negative reaction, prejudice against technology. And I considered it unworthy of my attention. And the spiritual realm was saying, you're not going to be able to move forward until you discover that the nature beings that you praise over here are exactly the same elemental beings that you are disgusted by and try to reject and have the least possible relationship with over here. And you're being thwarted in your development because you don't recognize that from the spiritual level, when you get behind your issues, when you get behind that, it's the same realm. And so then that has led me, that's one of many experiences that has led me to, over the last 3 years, seek to then come into an appropriate relationship with the Harmonic legions in all their different manifestations, and to develop relationships that are redemptive and partnerships where we're actually then able, in partnership, we're able to accomplish things with technology that are not, that natural scientists are not able to do. But as a spiritual scientist, we can partner and redeem Ahriman by working with technology. So that would be a starting place. But how about you? Do you want to say any more about your thoughts, Valdemar?
Well, I think even if we have a stone, there is some spirit behind it, in a very high Devahan world, more, low, in a lower level with plants and with animals, and in ourselves we have the spirit in ourselves. So it's not difficult to grasp that there is spirit behind all that. Now, with machines, it's different. Steiner calls the machines subnatural. They don't have a spirit in the higher worlds. You understand? So I think Ahriman is deceiving us when we make a similarity between true nature, like stones and plants and so on, and machines. Machines are of a different level. So we should have, we should regard them in a different way as with the rest of nature, right? Machines are not part of nature.
So this really is leading to a longer conversation in a different direction than what I want to focus on tonight, but it would be a really good one for us to have. And I'm not trying to have the last word, I'll give you a chance to respond. What I would say in response to that is that my research would suggest, based on Steiner and my experience, is that technology, that machinery is not purely subnatural, but it has your correct, I would say, I would agree with you, I would agree with Steiner. I understand, at least to some degree, what Steiner is saying, that technology, certain technologies have a subnatural element. But even those that have subnatural element are not solely subnatural. That's what I'd suggest.
Especially for anthropology.
I have a question about, well, kind of, so we can redeem Lucifer, but we cannot redeem Ahriman, and you were talking about redeeming.
Yeah, we redeem Ahriman. It's our responsibility to, as human beings, to redeem both the Ahrimanic and Luciferic legions. This is part of the imagery in Rudolf Steiner's, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm blanking on the woman who assisted him with sculpting the representative of humanity. But yeah, it was Edith. No,
It is.
Edith.
It is.
Yeah, Edith. And she together, anyway, so one of the things, Rudolf Steiner says a number of things about that, but one of the things that is really poignant is that when we have, the Christ reaching up to Lucifer, so to speak, and down, at least in this imagination of the sculpture, down to Ahriman, and they are, being sort of crushed or destroyed in some semblance, that it is not Christ who's destroying them, but it is Christ who's reaching up to draw them sort of back down, back up, back into relationship for redemption. And that process has a crushing component, just like many elements of our spiritual progress have this crushing, devastating, tragic, rending elements to it. So it is with these spiritual beings, but it just in the same as it is with us, as it is with them, that it's part of the process towards that transformation, towards the transmutation, back to cleansing, health, purification, etc. That's my understanding. And so that's a representative of humanity, meaning that we're to be doing that same work, that Christ is this image that we follow and learn to do as Christ is doing.
But the modern technology now is moving to azuric realms. We're talking about nuclear and a lot of microwave. It's kind of borderline on azuric realm. And I don't think we can redeem those forces. And that's what this technology now is inundating us, starting with 5G and the nuclear plants and radiation. And I see a problem with that.
Well, perhaps it remains, since we have a different perspective, it remains to be seen. And so we can each only speak from our own, experience and study and understanding. So I understand that. So I'm not attempting to argue, but I will say that, as I referred to earlier, that I've been actively being engaged in this work. And I would agree that with you that so what Steiner sets up for us is that my understanding, what Steiner is laying out for us, is that we have to learn how to work with natural nature. And we have, and Steiner has all these different ways of describing how we work with natural nature, so to speak, with the stones and the crystals and the trees and whatnot, and the minerals and all those things. And we have to gain, he uses the word mastery, we have to gain an appropriate mastery, a right relationship with natural nature. Then as we move forward in the Cain stream and move, development, and we start moving into technologies of various kinds, then we have to come into a right relationship at that level. And then as we start moving up, as we go up, or perhaps shall we use the image of down, as higher technology, but it's going down in terms of more into subnature and whatnot, more Ahrimanic, getting farther away, we're moving away from the Ahrimanic gifts to the Ahrimanic temptations. And then, so nature, Ahrimanic gifts start getting into the level of architecture and basic machinery and things like that, mechanical, truly mechanical. Then we could maybe say we're moving more into the, starting moving more from the straight, almost pure gift of Ahriman. We start moving into the temptations of Ahriman. And then as we start moving into what we call this higher technology, that's starting to lead us in the directions, like, as you say, to the Asuras and et cetera, what comes next. And all of that, it gets harder and harder and worse, and it becomes more and more evil, but only because we have not had the mastery at each of the levels of redeeming and keeping it in the right balance. So you're right, if we don't do step one, come into a right relationship with nature, if we don't do step two, come into right relationship with that which is, we could just describe really as mechanical. If we don't come to right relationship with that which is electrified, we now bring electricity and wet it with electricity with that which is purely mechanical. And then it keeps going on and on, as you've said. At each of those stages, we must master ourselves and master in the best possible way. As a better word, I think, is the Hebrew word that's used in Genesis 1 and 2, and it's the word stewardship. Coming to right stewardship, relationship, partnership with at these different realms, and only then will we succeed in being able, at least for a remnant of humanity, to be able to move on in health and wholeness as we move to future Jupiter. Does that make sense? Does that fit? Or what am I missing from your perspective? Anybody?
Are you talking about mechanical occultism, the moral aspect of mechanical occultism here? So replacing, because some technology could not be redeemed, but needs to be replaced. And I don't see how a human being is compatible with Azuric technology, because the death forces are too strong in it.
Yeah, so I think I'm not, I know what you're saying, and I agree at one level with what you're saying for sure, but there is also but the Asuras have a role as well, and there is one way in which I would suggest that it is, while there's, if I can just use the word, it's an intensification, or it's a further degradation, or or there's something that's greater by orders of magnitude. But nevertheless, it's within the same paradigm, the same stream of our human evolution and redemption, of all the forces and beings that are arrayed against us as gift. And that's and we know that Rudolf Steiner has said that all of these things are important and serve a purpose. And so I think it's not for us. I'm wary of interpreting what Rudolf Steiner has said as meaning we give up or we turn our backs or we ignore these other beings and what they bring and see them only as evil and not recognize their purpose. And the purpose, as Rudolf Steiner says, everywhere is gift. Now, somebody has written in the chat that they think that those of us who have been speaking here and having a certain amount of disagreement or different ways of perceiving or things, that we may not really be that far apart, that we're just looking at it from different perspectives. And I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Well, what I'm seeing is that this is an opportunity for humanity to start working with gods who can help us overcome the Azuric influences and bring the gods back, who could defeat those adversaries, because we cannot as human beings. So as we go lower, we go higher in a way, and that prompts us to connect to those higher beings who can, assist in keeping humanity on its path.
Yeah.
And we need to be asking for that help at this point.
Yeah. And I would offer that includes Ahriman.
Is anyone else allowed? I've had my hand raised. Do you ever call on anybody?
I so apologize, Theodore. I had not seen your hand till now. Please go ahead.
As you began, I was troubled by your framing this as nature, and I was trying to find another word for it, and I'm not sure whether environment is the right word, but nevertheless, as you were driving down this road, the important thing, it seems to me, was that you were attentive. And remember what Steiner said. He said one of the most important thing is man, know thyself. So you examined yourself and you were attentive. We're going around all of these other beings. To me, this is the first step to reach freedom. Then you see the truth. Thank you.
Beautiful, Theodore. Thank you. And I think that's not just you referred to my story, but that applies to everybody who's spoken so far. It applies to all of our stories. So thank you. Beautifully said.
Nancy Poor has her actual hand up.
Oh, I don't see it here, but Nancy, go ahead.
She's there.
So thank you, Lelan. And it's no wonder that your organization is called Cosmic Wisdom, because obviously you're trying to get us right there to advancing to spirit self. And clearly, it's quite a jump. And so it isn't that we're doubting Steiner and appreciating the depth that you're bringing, because it's looking with full consciousness. This is what we're saying. Now, of course, the elephant in the room is Sorath, because this is not part of rightful evolution and not part of redemption. And so that's the one that is so active now and so sabotaging everything in rightful evolution. And I think, for all of us who love nature and who want our children to be in it, or seeing them becoming, poor substitutes for their mission on Earth by being so sabotaged through all of the technology, that we know that nature can be healing and supportive and necessary, and our biodynamics and all of that. What I feel you're asking us to do is to look at it with love, because the utmost love and gratitude, that's what I'm picking up, is what I sense you're trying to tell us, of this constant state of being open, loving, and accepting of what is coming to us. And it doesn't mean that we can easily love what we see happening to our children today and to society. But we can love nature and we can redeem elementals, even if we're old and that's all we can do is sit on the porch. We can redeem elementals with our love. And that is in the Michael lectures. Anywhere you want to look. In the Michaelic lectures, we redeem elementals. There are good elementals, and there's a lot of them that are so ticked off they're working for Ahriman. Absolutely. So consciousness, love, that's what we're being asked. That's where we meet the Christ. That's where we meet our times.
Beautiful, Nancy. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And yeah, several times you might have caught me pausing and almost going to bring in Sorat, but I was resisting. So, but yes, absolutely, one of the elephants in the room. And yes, you're bringing this other part of the message that I am not seeking to. I'm just going to say what you said in slightly different words. I'm not trying to set up that nature is evil. But that Rudolf Steiner wants us to help us recognize that this is a perfect example of what he talks about with both Lucifer and Ahriman, is that they bring these gifts, but then if we follow them too far, then those gifts become temptations, and then those temptations become evil. And so it's becoming aware of that, as you said, in full consciousness, with gratitude for the gifts and even gratitude for the temptations, because in both cases, the gifts are healing and developmental. The temptations are the challenges that we need to wake up and to develop additional strengths. And then when it goes so far as evil, it becomes the opportunity, as you said, to continue to seek to love and redeem. And it's not just the beings themselves, but it's also then the humans who get trapped. And again, it helps us wake up and discover these wider realities. So thank you.
Hi, Jamie. I actually was gonna say something, but I think I lost it. But it did have to do with love. I really appreciate the story that you shared, because I can connect with real life experiences. And at one point, I really hated nature. You wouldn't see me outside. I didn't like going in my backyard. I was very materialistic. I didn't believe in spirit. So that was like just 3 years ago. But now, and now it's like, even when this Zoom came on and I got the email, but I'm studying Ahriman, I really find that Ahriman really works inside me. I feel like it's my shadow. All the things I try to ignore about myself, the things that I don't like. And it just comes out, and I don't even know if that's true or not, but that's kind of what I'm gathering. So I think even at first, I was like, gosh, is he saying that nature's bad? Like what? But even I have to really discern even my own thoughts, because I can go straight to a place and not, I don't know. I feel like if I resist something, then I need to look at it more. I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but I did hear a lecture. Actually, I listened to it several times, and it was The Purpose of Earth, and that Rudolf Steiner gave. And it was very beautiful, because he explains that the Christ pours down from the sun love into everything. And but that humanity hasn't reached that yet. So I don't know. And everything that everyone shared made me really think of that lecture, but I really appreciate being here. I don't think that made any sense though.
It did to me. Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, and it did, because what you were tapping into is a couple things, at least. One is the variety of experiences that one has with nature that can be at times confounding, and they're real, they're existential, but we don't understand them. And so Rudolf Steiner, what I'm seeking to share is just this one point, this one perspective. And Rudolf Steiner gives so many more perspectives on nature, including what you were referring to, if I would use from John, the Gospel of John, how the Logos interweaves, all in all and through all and sustains all. And so I'm only seeking to bring this one point and have us be really focused on it and realize that the significance of this, because at least in my life, I've discovered this to be a key that unlocks at a very practical level all sorts of things that were concepts but weren't living and practical, or were confusing, concepts that made sense but I still couldn't act on them, or concepts that were confusing and also life experiences that I didn't know how connected with a bunch of these concepts. And this particular one pulls back the curtain, and at least in my experience, ends up being revelation after revelation after revelation when we apply it to all the other things that Rudolf Steiner and other spiritual sources give us. Well, if somebody else wants to jump in, please do. But if not, we've spent such a nice chunk of time discussing that with your permission, I'd like to share some additional information from Rudolf Steiner that goes a little deeper. But before I do, anybody else want to jump in? All right. Thank you for this wonderful discussion. Okay. So moving to a different lecture, how the spiritual world, oh, by the way, the last lecture, by the way, was only an excerpt from the lecture, the starting place for the lecture. And remember, the title was about how to find Christ in nature. So go back to, I heartily recommend you go back and see the whole lecture. I just gave you the introduction to the lecture. So this now goes back in time to 1913, and it's a series of excerpts out of 10 lectures on how the spiritual world projects into physical existence. And I'm just sort of cherry picking a few quotes that sort of begin to give us a little bit of a deeper understanding of the application of what was just shared, what he shared in 1922. Now, of course, this is 1913, so he's setting it up. So we can see how he was giving us the pieces early on that set up the big reveal in 1922. So I'm just going to give you a quick excerpt, and then he also starts to point in some of these other directions that I'm acknowledging, but am not focused on. But I want you to see that I'm aware that it goes off, that there's more pieces to this. I recognize there's more pieces and more moving parts. I'm just wanting to suggest that really grasping this one and really striving to apply it and have it shed light on all of our other conceptual frameworks for nature and technology and Ahriman and Lucifer and Asuras and Sorat and the Antichrist and all of that, that I want to suggest that this one's a worthwhile one. Now, it may not be for you because you're paying attention to other things right now. I get that. But for other people, this might be a key that could be really useful to you. So anyway, here's some more things that Rudolf Steiner said that set up the big reveal in 1922. And as has been said, yeah, in hindsight, it's totally, if we have these concepts, it's totally obvious that Ahriman is the God, the Lord of nature. That sure, conceptually, that doesn't surprise us. My point again here is that how many of us, I'm talking to myself, because until Steiner said it, I didn't get it. And I want to suggest that I talk to so many people and hear from so many people who get stuck. I could tell stories of the people who are stuck, and all they needed to learn was that it was Ahriman, and that was involved, that they were mistaking as they thought that they were aiming for Christ and getting Christ, and should have been getting Christ, should have been perceiving Christ, because that's the way it's supposed to work. And they thought in their conceptualization, and it was wrong. And so if this is not unlocking anything for you, then, I'm glad you've already got it. But for those of you, for other people, this might be helpful. Okay, here we go. When our plants grow from the ground, winter as autumn approaches and the leaves fall, the elemental spirits whom Ahriman sends to the earth's surface are in evidence everywhere. I love Nancy's image of sitting on the porch and blessing and offering healing and gratitude to the elemental spirits. And it just, I can let what she said stand. He then Ahriman gathers in all that is dying. He has it gathered in by his elemental spirits. When you walk through the fields in autumn and see the beautiful colors of dying nature clairvoyantly, Ahriman is extending his powers everywhere and has his elemental messengers everywhere who bring him everything that is withering, physical, and etheric by nature. For when human beings develop their ordinary thoughts relating to the outside world, when they are utterly materialistic in thinking only the things that happen outwardly, their thoughts affect the brain to such an extent that the brain excretes substances which Ahriman can really work with, so that Ahriman is really accompanying waking daytime life all the time. And the more materialistic we are, the more are we obsessed with Ahriman. And I think within the greater context, for me, this is, Rudolf Steiner just trying to, as gently as possible, not like me sort of being a little more in your face here, just gently saying, you may not realize how materialistic you are. In 1922, he's a little more direct, but even then he's being pretty gentle about it. He's allowing it to remain mostly esoteric, mostly occulted. You have to be paying attention. You have to be awake. You have to care. You have to be interested in the possibility that he's saying something that has dramatic ramifications, because he's not being dramatic. I'm being dramatic. He's not. So I apologize if I'm being over dramatic, but I think, as has been pointed out, we're running out of time as larger humanity to become aware of these things. And so there's more drama outside us in the material and spiritual realms. The spiritual world is bringing the drama. And if we just ignore the drama and think that we don't have to discover and work with the drama, and we think, we just sort of focus in on ourselves and protect ourselves and hang on till we cross the threshold and, leave it to our grandchildren and us coming back in 4 or 5 generations, whatever, depending on how fast we're coming back, each of us individually. And, we'll pick it up then. I think that that's a dangerous approach. Where does the materialism in the physical world come from? That materialism where people say there is no Ahriman, there simply is no devil. Who is it who shouts loudest that there's no devil? Those who are most possessed by the devil. For the spirit whom we call Ahriman is enormously interested in having his existence denied by those who are most possessed by him. And this is not what he's saying here, but for me, I'm just saying me, it arises for me that then there's this something that can be similar to it, that can affect me, that can affect others, I think, and that is that we know there is a devil, we know there's Ahriman, and we might be calling him out, we might be pointing him out, might be saying there's a problem, and we're throwing out the alarms, but what are we doing to recognize the other aspects of Ahriman that are gift? And what are we doing that's partnering with him, that's developing that, what Rudolf Steiner indicated we need to do, and at these other levels, as I've already indicated, and as Steiner has indicated. And I feel that if we're not actively engaged in the practical work, day by day, thought by thought, action by action, then we're not much different from the people who deny that there is anything, because we're not actually doing anything about it. So if you deny there is a devil, that there is Ahriman, if you remain ignorant about it, then you're not helping humanity move forward, or your own self. And it's the great tragedy of our age, says Steiner, is that we're shredding our own souls with the evil because we're ignoring it. But we might be calling it out and have conceptualizations, but what are we doing again, thought by thought, moment by moment, action by action, to heal the rift, to transform the evil? That's what I'm wanting to, invite those who are watching this to consider. When we find ourselves in the midst of a field of most modern material activity, this is not something we should criticize or denigrate, for it is indeed a region which shows us how things must come to be more and more in external life on earth as time goes on. So here we are again, one of the many ways in which Rudolf Steiner says is, don't be alarmist, don't criticize Ahriman and those who are materialistic, don't denigrate Ahriman and technology and those who are invested in it, because these things must come, and they must be more and more in external life on earth as time goes on. But he's also not saying here, well, then just give up and just let it happen. That's not what he's saying. We would be lacking in sense if we were to say, let the old times return when people had woods and meadows around them, as it were, and the original life of nature, rather than the chimneys we see in our day. So what is he pointing to? Our anthroposophical view of life gradually teaches us to see things as they are, and not to be unjustifiably critical of life as it is. Undoubtedly, we have to admit to ourselves that the earth is going through an evolution. And if we, equipped with our anthroposophical knowledge, or even just sensibly using the knowledge that exists outside anthroposophy, if we would just look back on earlier times in earth evolution, then compared to an earth furrowed by railways, with telegraph wires everywhere, with electrical currents passing through it everywhere, earlier times do seem to us to be times of spring and summer, whilst the times ahead of us seem like autumn and winter of our earth. But it is not for us to complain about this. No, it is something we must call a necessity and engage. It is not for us to complain and be alarmist, just as it is not right for people to complain and alarmist when summer comes to an end and autumn and winter lie ahead. Ahriman, now shifting gears, Ahriman is all about, so what do we do about it? Ahriman is always ready to offset Lucifer, and Lucifer is always ready to counterbalance Ahriman. So what do we do about this? How do we make progress? How do we redeem our, what's one of the many ways in which we may begin to offset Ahriman and counterbalance Lucifer? Or the two spirits, Lucifer and Ahriman, are always present between death and rebirth. So interestingly, now he does talk about in this life, but he sets what we do between birth and between birth and death. But I wanted to share this because he does this, is part of his place for helping us understand how we engage redemptively with Ahriman and Lucifer between birth and death. We begin to get the picture and an understanding only if we understand first how they are present with us between death and rebirth. So again, Steiner talks way more about it. I'm just giving you a couple of quotes so you have an idea of where to go if you want to study this and figure out how to apply this in your own lives. So the two spirits, Lucifer and Ahriman, are always present between death and rebirth, but each time one of them is more present and the other less. In other words, as we go through to the midnight hour, cross the threshold, go through, all the levels and hierarchies of spirit land and whatnot to the midnight hour and then come back, sometimes our journey is accompanied mostly by Lucifer, and other times our journey is accompanied mostly by Ahriman, and they alternate basically. So we pass away into and then return again from the life between death and rebirth. Okay, we got that. So Lucifer is above all at our side in the passing away elements, which is kind of interesting. Think about when we think about the typical ways we think about how to recognize Lucifer and Ahriman. We're going to catch here that Rudolf Steiner is flipping it. Now, again, if we have the conceptualization of mirroring between, macrocosm and microcosm and incarnation and the life between birth and rebirth and the life between death and rebirth, we understand that, oh yeah, here it is. Steiner's doing this flipping again. But Steiner's saying if you're going to be effective in this context, he's saying if you're going to be effective in the incarnation, you need to understand the mirroring of excarnation, and that these work together, and you got to work together. And I don't have it here, but in this place is where he also starts talking about where we partner with the dead. Is critical to this. At the practical level, if you want to be successful, the evil in your soul that's rending and tearing you apart and is the human tragedy, he's working with this here. So Lucifer is above all on our side in the passing away, not Ahriman. Ahriman when we move towards being born again. Now we can figure that out on the other side, that makes sense. For Ahriman takes us back to the earth again. He is important in the second half of coming back again. But notice it's important, it's important, it's important. So why is it important and how does that apply? Both Lucifer and Ahriman are able to do dreadful things, to the people who do not want to believe in him in their life between birth and death. Oh, does that mean that Lucifer and Ahriman, for those who do believe and know that he exists and are willing to work with them, means Lucifer and Ahriman don't do dreadful things to those who are ready to work with them and partner with them and recognize their gifts? Is that what Steiner's implying? Ahriman will give them too much of his powers for people who are ignoring him or disbelieving or willfully choosing to go down that path. He confers on them something he has always to spare, the powers connected with earthly gravity. That means sickness and premature death for people, bringing all kinds of accidents that seem random into earthly existence and so on, but they are not random. All this has to do with these Ahrimanic powers. This is actually good. This is the good news. This is helpful. This is purposeful, because it may well be that a sickness turns out to be something that contributes a great deal to our ascending development. This Luciferic influence has brought it about that there has to be purification in our nature. What are the things that you're aware of consciously in your life that you do in your thinking, feeling, and willing that is purification? Can you name the things that you are consciously engaged in that have a purification influence in your nature? So this Luciferic influence, and obviously he's referring to something else. I'm only giving you, this little quote. So you have to go find out what Steiner's talking about. This Luciferic influence has brought it about that there has to be purification in our nature. proceeding from the unconscious to the conscious mind. And we must work to develop conscious ethical ideas and motivation as we struggle against ourselves, and then follow those ethical concepts of our own free will. Now, we have a tendency to jump to, oh, develop conscious ethical ideas and have this inner will, free will, out of free will, develop motivation, which is a higher level of will. It's at the level of ego, motive, right? It's level of ego, it's higher than most people are operating. Most people are operating out of the astral at the level of desire, but the cutting edge of humanity and conscious and soul development is at the working to operate at the level of ego, which is at the level of motive of free will. Okay, so that's what he's talking about. We have to develop, and so what we do is we tend to focus on the ethical ideas and the struggle, and then to follow through on our ethical concepts. But this is presupposed on having these purification processes at work in our nature that are not just unconscious, but have this that proceed from the unconscious to the conscious. When we're trying to do this work only out of our conscious mind, we've missed the whole foundation. That's what I'd like to point out, that Rudolf Steiner is gently telling us. I'm sort of pounding it. It is Lucifer, therefore, who makes it possible for us to follow ethical ideas once we've developed them within ourselves. Who is the being that you are partnering with, that I am partnering with, to develop my conscious ethical ideas and develop the strength, the higher level of free will, of motive to accomplish that? Who is the being that I'm going to for help? Is it Lucifer? If not, why not? What is the nature of these ethical principles? They do not compel us. We follow them of our own free will. A principle is never ethical if it compels. Principles we follow under compulsion come to us from the outside world. When human beings perceive him in the spirit, the Christ will have in common with ethical principles that one can also deny him, that he does not force anyone to recognize him. Are you having difficulty perceiving Christ? Do you begin to see that with a bunch of these quotes that we're setting up, is that perceiving Christ is connected to our relationships with Ahriman and Lucifer? It is the body's destiny on earth to grow old. It is man's higher destiny to maintain a young mind and an aging body in connection with the mystery on Golgotha. And so, that should be of Golgotha. And so feel ever increasing hope that however much winter's gales may rage in the soul and temptations may live in the soul, the living trust shall never end that the element that entered into the earth's aura through the mystery of Golgotha shall rise from the depths of the soul. And then this quote that Rudolf Steiner uses more than once from the Silesian Angelius Silesius: the Christ could be born 1,000 times in Bethlehem, but all in vain, lest he's born in me. Well, I was going to pause here for conversation, and I realize we only have officially 10 minutes left. I will just take just a very brief, small amount of time to just very quickly show you what I was going to, but not go word for word through what I also wanted to share as the closing. And this is from The Birth of Christ in the Human Soul, which was presented as part of a Christmas presentation. And he asks the question that is so close to many people that I know: how may I experience the Christ impulse within my own soul? Alas, says Steiner, this thought is often a heavy burden in our hearts. Now, my dear friends, that which we may call the Christ impulse does not become rooted in our souls in a moment, forthwith and tempestuously. And in different ages, it takes root differently in human beings. He then goes on to talk about Christ and sort of as we come to be able to experience Christ, not abstractly, but in reality through Christmas, and also how we come to know Christ through Easter, birth and death. And truly the Christ must live within us, since we are not human beings in an absolute sense, but human beings of a definite epoch. The Christ must be born within us according to the sound of his words in our epoch. And what he's referring to here is our connection, Christ's connection, and what must become our connection to Lucifer and Ahriman. And Steiner is really forthright, again, in his gentle way, but he talks about how in these contexts, he talks about very specifically how while we must focus on Christ, this would be my way of summarizing, and you can go find this yourself if you read these lectures, we must focus on Christ, absolutely, but we will fail unless we also focus just as much on Lucifer. He says that very directly. And Ahriman, and he's in this, when he says that, it's there, and then he says that very directly. I've not found the equivalent, I actually haven't searched for it. I haven't found the absolute equivalent, one sentence, absolutely direct, that you can't get to Christ without bringing, so the image of representative of humanity, of sort of bringing Lucifer down to Christ, being part of what Christ is doing to bring Lucifer down, so to speak. He speaks, I believe, repeatedly and in other words about bringing Ahriman up. I think I've given clues to some of those verses. Maybe someone else knows where he says just as directly we have to bring Ahriman up, just as we have to bring to the level of Christ and work with them explicitly and in partnership and recognize that. And then he concludes this lecture. Rudolf Steiner says, except you become as little children, you'll not be able to enter the kingdom of heaven. And he talks about this within the context of darkness and helplessness and manifestation and what must be done in relationship with these other beings and with each other in order to find strength, comfort, confidence, and hope in all circumstances of life. Well, thank you. I am ready to pass it back to you all.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Theodore.
So Lelan, do you think we have about 5-7 minutes for more conversation?
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
I'm happy to stay.
Yeah, friends, yeah, please use this time.
It looks like Aaron has a question. Oh, let's see. He wrote it in the chat. Who gave those harmonic powers their tasks as it was mentioned earlier? Well, it was referred to briefly in one of the screen slides that I had up. It was referred to loosely as the progressive powers, the powers that were responsible for at the beginning of human creation and evolution. They're the ones who called upon Ahriman. Well, they called forth, they sent out the call for a help wanted ad for some beings to come help take on this other task. And as Rudolf Steiner says, as you see in the previous slide, the Ahriman stepped forward and said, me and mine, we'll do it. And then what was the GA number of the last lecture that I was just briefly going through? That was GA 187, the birth of Christ in the human soul.
Lelan, thank you for tonight. I'm wondering if you made a comment at the very end about it's important for us to increase our connection more consciously with Lucifer. And you had a hesitation, and then you said, and Ahriman. But did you mean that because Ahriman is so much present with it, you know, so obvious that we need to focus more on Lucifer?
Oh, my hesitation was only because I was trying to decide, since there is a very specific citation where in one sentence says, I know this is, he basically says, I know this is shocking, but you have to work with Lucifer. I'm paraphrasing, but he says, basically, I know it's shocking, but we have to be able to develop to the point that we recognize that we must work with Lucifer as much as we work with Christ. And I paused because I was trying to see if in the last minute I would get some sort of inspiration that would make me think of an equivalent quote, but I haven't come across an equivalent one sentence quote that says that. I believe, but as I said, I believe that the wealth of evidence suggests that Rudolf Steiner is implying that with regard to Ahriman, and that personally, at where I'm at this point, I'm just saying this is my current thinking or hypothesis, is that 100 years ago, he could say that to his audience in front of him about Lucifer, but he couldn't yet say that 100 years ago to the audience in front of him about Ahriman, because what he kept saying over and over and over is that Ahriman's time is not until the end of the 20th century and beginning of the 21st century. So I believe that this wealth of information that Steiner is pointing to that, but he couldn't say it in one sentence 100 years ago. But I believe that effectively we can understand that today for us, he would say that. And I've come to that understanding, but it's up to others to, I just want to be honest that that's my understanding, and I don't have a proof text for it.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was thinking about in the beginning of this lecture or this presentation about how beautiful nature is, but then at the end I was thinking about how hard it is too. I did some volunteering rescuing songbirds, and that was like so painful to see how nature works and how brutal it is. I often think it's just a miracle that even a baby bird even survives in the wild. So, but then I was thinking about storms and all this and that. So I'm sure more will come through.
Absolutely. And so we must be engaged. I still, as I've been preparing for 3 weeks or something for this presentation, I have spent so much time out in nature purposefully in preparing for this, so that I would come and share what I'm sharing as best I can, embedded and connected to nature, so that I'm really seeking to speak for nature and in support of nature, and in this much deeper, broader understanding than generally has been my experience of our conversations. And I hope that it will be helpful in your spiritual exercises, your soul exercises, your body exercises, that, as Steiner was saying, that we discover, that we become conscious and create conscious ways that our thoughts are purifying, that what we eat is purifying, that everything we receive. So you can go back and see those quotes, I've shared them, and that everything that we do, which is embedded in nature and which is ingesting nature, both physically and soul levels and spiritual levels, because nature is operating at those 3 levels, that Steiner is saying that we become conscious of it and we be working with nature at all those levels. And in that consciously, that we move from unconsciousness to consciousness, so that everything we eat, everything that we say, everything we think, every exercise that we do is recognized that we couldn't be doing any of that without nature, because we're incarnated. And it just is, it's everywhere. But then we have to realize that as you're saying, Jamie, nature is also red of tooth and claw. I don't know who, I'm getting that as a quote from somebody, I don't know who from, but there's that element of it. And there's the beautiful growing, sprouting plants in spring in the Southern hemisphere, and the beautiful colors changing in the Northern hemisphere. And so just to broaden our perspective, to realize who is all involved, and to enter into relationship and partnership with them. And they're seeking to redeem us as we seek to redeem them.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about social aspect, because super consciousness, which is radiating from Harmonic world through all technology and devices, humanity should balance by developing principle of brotherhood and working together in professional associations in economic sphere. So I think it's strong call to be brothers and unite human consciousness in order to balance Harmonic one.
Absolutely. The quotes that I was using were focused on the individual. And I'm really grateful, Andre, for you bringing up that it goes up to this next level of relationship and partnership and brotherhood and in all the different spheres. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Andre.
because main task of fifth cultural epoch, this is conscious rebuilding of level of production and economics. It will be a surprise for many anthroposophists, because main task of our time, this is time of conscious rebuilding, restoring economic realm. So, and it's all about dealing with technology, and it's all about dealing with Ahriman. So Ahriman becoming our main partner.
There it is.
Teacher.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah,
Andre, is that right, that we cannot individually conquer Ahriman, but we can only do it in groups, according to Steiner?
Yeah, absolutely.
In a group,
Because we already do not understand what we're dealing with. For example, if you're working with computer, I mean, it goes beyond of any individual consciousness. So only group of specialists can consciously permeate into go into economic realm, because all task, this is consciously meet economics, not in chaotic manner, like in the age of capitalism, because it already belongs to past, but we have to plan, we have to consciously work with all our devices, with all our machinery. So, which is only possible in groups, because one human being is too small to deal with.
Not to cut anybody off, but I do see David raised his hand.
I want to say first, I think it's very brave of you to try to do this, such a big topic. And unfortunately, it seems our community isn't at the place where it can accept a series of lectures by somebody on a topic the way that they did with Steiner. And so some things can't, they necessarily get distorted because you can't really make all the connections. But I thought it was very brave of you to do that. I just wanted to share quickly, because this is a topic that's, you just could spend any number of time. Just some images that I think might be, either came to me or might be useful for other people, and or might be useful for other people. One of them is, there's a lecture in which Steiner says, we owe love of this world to Ahriman, and we owe freedom to Lucifer. So that was really shocking to me when I read that he associated Ahriman with any kind of love was kind of surprising to me at the time that I read that. And I think one of the guiding things can be for us is to realize that, Steiner talks about the fall of man, the moral fall of man as the separation of man from the higher worlds. And, but that gives us our freedom. So, and on the one hand, if it's a permanent state, it's a bad thing.
because we don't actually become free out of that. But it's a necessary step over in the process. So this shifting between Lucifer and Ahriman is a dynamical balance. And you see that in the representative of man, you know, he stands in the middle balance between them. And when we walk as upright beings, we have to lift one leg off the earth, right, at a time, and then place the other one back down. So we have an image of that. Also, I don't know if people have seen The Last Temptation of Christ, but this is actually a very interesting picture of this, because in this telling of the story, Christ at the very end is becoming human. And he says, you know, on the cross, God, why have you forsaken me? And at that point, what he thinks is God comes to him in this telling of this story and says, you can come down off the cross now, you've fulfilled your mission, and you can live as a human being out a normal life. And the Christ has become so in love with the world and with humanity that he does this. And for whatever you think about it, it's Judas that has to track him down and tell him, you've not fulfilled your mission. And at that point, he looks at what he thinks is God, and he notices this is not the being he thought it was. And he goes back and dies on the cross. So it's a kind of interesting tale about just what you were talking about in this lecture. So the other thing is, I have wondered greatly about the difference between Michael and Ahriman, because they are both talked about as being masters of the intellect. And so there has to be a really critical difference between these two. And Steiner talks about Ahriman as being a spirit of form, but he says the other spirits of form never enter into the physical. They create from outside the physical into the physical world, but they themselves never enter the physical. Whereas Ahriman has entered the physical and creates out of the physical world. And that's, I think, an interesting thought to carry when we try to understand what the difference between these beings is. Because one clearly leads to a continued separation of man. If you stay with Ahriman, you're in a continuous state of separation from the other higher powers. And that's where we go too far, perhaps, to that pole. And the last thing I wanted to say is that Steiner, at the end of his life, was, when my path of following this, you know, division between Michael and Ahriman, I noticed at the end of his life, he was very adamant about us having to come to grips with the idea that the intellect in all of us has fallen. And it is an active process for us to follow the path consciously to its redemption. And he says, when you do that, you can have a test if you're doing this correctly, because if you start to get proud of what you've accomplished, then this is a sign that you're off the path. Because he says a person that truly understands how vast wisdom is just humbled by the very vision of that. That I think he uses this example of drawing wisdom in a pitcher from a huge lake. And you know, yes, I've got a little wisdom, but you know, the vastness of this lake that you can't possibly take in necessarily is humbling. Anyway, I want to thank you very much. I think you did a really great job. You left us with a lot of things to ponder in this very big topic. And I think it was very brave of you to do that, knowing that, of course, people would see other aspects that you had no time to really get into and connect them to this. And so I want to thank you.
I appreciate
friends,
that.
we are working for 2 hours and 10 minutes. I think it's a good moment to say thank you to Lelan for his bold and brave presentation and round this session. Yeah, thank you so much, and please feel free to unmute yourself and thank Lelan and greet each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Very, very
Thank you.
powerful and
Thank you.
inspiring.
Thank you.
Very inspiring. Thank you, Leland.
Thank you, Leland. That was brilliant.
Lot to chew on.
Thank you all.
Leland,
For
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you. I always I just have enjoyed your presentations. And I've realized that I've been like kind of studying under you for like a year. I consider you like my anthroposophical mentor. Thank you. I really appreciate it, this whole community.
Leland, I enjoyed that too. And I think that you have developed a lecture style that really teaches, you go over things like Rudolf Steiner's paragraphs. You always think, oh, I think I read that before, but you need to be reminded. And thank you for taking all that trouble, because it came from your heart and your head, dare I say it. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
All the preparation that you did, it really came out and showed, and not just book, but what this other person said from your heart.